Look around your city. The highways, the suburbs, the downtown core. It all feels like it grew naturally, right? But what if I told you it didn't? What if the lines dividing our neighborhoods, the wealth disparities, the very air some people breathe, were all part of a deliberate design? This is the story of how American cities were segregated by design. Woven into the narrative of progress and innovation is a darker, more deliberate thread, a story of exclusion, of lines drawn on maps and walls erected, both visible and invisible. It's a history of how urban planning, the very discipline meant to create orderly cities for all, was systematically weaponized to create and perpetuate racial inequality. And this was not an accident. It was a choice. The foundation of this exclusion was laid in the early 20th century, as millions of African Americans began the Great Migration, moving from the rural South to escape Jim Crow and find economic opportunity. They were met with a new set of barriers. At the forefront was a new tactic: racial zoning. In 1910, Baltimore passed the country's first racial zoning ordinance, a law making it illegal for an African American person to move onto a block where the majority of residents were white, and vice versa. Cities across the South quickly followed suit. The Supreme Court did strike down these explicit laws in 1917, but not because they were discriminatory. It was because they interfered with the property rights of a white seller. This ruling left the door wide open for more subtle methods to achieve the same end. With overt zoning off the table, racially restrictive covenants became the primary tool. These were legally binding clauses inserted into property deeds that prohibited the sale or occupation of a property by anyone not of the Caucasian race. The language was shockingly blunt. A common clause read, "Hereafter, no part of said property shall be occupied by any person not of the Caucasian race." Some were even more specific, barring persons of the Ethiopian race, or by Japanese or Chinese, or any other Malay or Asiatic race. The only common exception was for domestic servants, a chilling reminder of the desired social hierarchy. These covenants weren't just private agreements. They were promoted by real estate boards and developers, becoming a standard feature of new subdivisions across the country. Beyond legalistic tools, a more brutal form of segregation took hold in thousands of communities: the sundown town. These were all-white towns that explicitly excluded non-whites after dark. Signs posted at the town limits often warned, "Nigger, don't let the sun go down on you." Enforcement ranged from police harassment to outright violence. Beginning around 1890, hundreds of towns, particularly in the Midwest, forcibly expelled their black residents through violent race riots, destroying homes and businesses and forcing survivors to flee. The existence of thousands of these towns created a geography of fear, making even simple travel perilous for African Americans, and leading to the creation of guides like the Negro Motorist Green Book to navigate the hostile landscape. While local ordinances and private agreements laid the groundwork, it was the federal government's intervention during the New Deal that institutionalized segregation on a massive, national scale. Policies created to combat the Great Depression's housing crisis were designed from the outset to primarily benefit white Americans. The creation of the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, in 1934 was a landmark. It didn't lend money, but it ensured long-term mortgages made by private banks, making home ownership accessible to the middle class for the first time. It was a revolutionary program built on a foundation of profound racial bias. To decide which loans it would insure, the FHA created residential security maps for cities across the country, color-coding neighborhoods to indicate mortgage risk. Neighborhoods were graded from A to D. A areas colored green were the best. They were new, homogeneous, and exclusively white. D areas colored red were labeled hazardous. These were almost invariably where black, immigrant, and working-class families lived. This practice became known as redlining. The FHA's official underwriting manual explicitly warned against inharmonious racial groups and recommended using restrictive covenants. The consequences were devastating. Redlining starved minority neighborhoods of mortgage capital making it impossible for residents to buy or repair their homes, and systematically blocking them from building wealth through home equity. At the same time, the FHA overwhelmingly subsidized the construction of new, all-white suburbs, fueling white flight from city centers. Between 1934 and 1962, a staggering 98% of the $120 billion in new housing subsidized by the federal government went to white Americans. This massive government-backed investment in white homeownership and disinvestment in communities of color is a foundational cause of the vast racial wealth gap that persists today. Federal policy also segregated cities through its public housing programs. From its inception, public housing was explicitly segregated. In many cities, integrated neighborhoods were demolished to make way for large, segregated housing projects. These projects were frequently built in already poor Black neighborhoods, further isolating residents from economic opportunity. Over time, inadequate funding for maintenance and policies that concentrated the very poorest households turned these projects from a potential stepping stone into a trap, creating isolated pockets of deep poverty. In the second half of the 20th century, the tools of segregation became even more physically destructive. Under the guise of progress, two massive federal initiatives, urban renewal and the interstate highway system, were weaponized to decimate minority communities. The Housing Act of 1949 established urban renewal, giving cities funds to clear areas designated as slums or blighted. In practice, the term blight was often a racially coded euphemism for the presence of African Americans. The program earned the cynical moniker Negro removal. Across the country, vibrant Black communities were leveled. These weren't just buildings. They were established neighborhoods with Black-owned businesses, churches, and social clubs. In Pittsburgh, the thriving Hill District was sliced in half to build an arena. In Detroit, the Black Bottom neighborhood was razed. Displaced families, compensated at below-market rates for properties devalued by redlining, were often forced into overcrowded public housing, severing the potential for intergenerational wealth. Running parallel to urban renewal was the largest public works project in American history, the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. This act authorized 41,000 miles of interstate highways. But for urban communities of color, this was a disaster by design. Planners frequently routed interstates directly through the heart of Black neighborhoods. These communities were seen as politically powerless and the path of least resistance. The land was cheaper, a direct result of redlining. The highways were also consciously used as physical barriers to wall off Black communities from white ones. In Atlanta, Mayor William Hartsfield openly referred to Interstate 20 as the boundary between the white and Negro communities. The devastation was nationwide. In Miami, I-95 destroyed the vibrant Overtown community, the Harlem of the South. In St. Paul, Minnesota, I-94 split the Black Rondo neighborhood in two, destroying hundreds of homes and businesses. Between 1957 and 1977, the highway system displaced over 1 million people, the vast majority of whom were poor and non-white, wiping out homes, businesses, and generational wealth. The explicitly racist policies of the past were outlawed by the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but the law did little to undo the damage. The geographic and economic patterns established by a century of segregation by design did not disappear. They have simply evolved. Today, we see this legacy in gentrification. Many of the same urban neighborhoods that were once deliberately devalued have become attractive to wealthier, often whiter residents. As rents and property taxes skyrocket, longtime residents, who are disproportionately low-income people of color, are priced out. Between 2000 and 2013, at least 135,000 Black and Hispanic residents were displaced from gentrifying neighborhoods in major American cities. The historical segregation of communities has also created a landscape of profound environmental injustice. This is often called environmental racism. The same redline neighborhoods denied mortgages were often zoned for industrial use, or had highways built through them. Today, Black Americans are 75% more likely than white Americans to live in fence-lined communities, next to commercial facilities that produce noise, odor, or toxic emissions. This explains Cancer Alley in Louisiana, an 85-mile industrial corridor through a majority Black population, and Asthma Alley in the South Bronx, where heavy traffic emissions lead to alarmingly high asthma rates for children. The single greatest driver of the racial wealth gap in the United States is the disparity in homeownership. By systematically denying Black families access to federally backed mortgages, while subsidizing white suburban homeownership, the government engineered a massive transfer of wealth. Today, homes in predominantly Black neighborhoods are valued at an average of $48,000 less than comparable homes in white neighborhoods. In 2019, the median wealth for a white family was over 7 times that of a Black family. This chasm is a direct result of housing policy. This also drives educational inequality. Because school funding relies on local property taxes, segregated housing creates segregated and unequally resourced schools. And the consequences are psychological. Forced displacement from urban renewal and gentrification causes root shock, a traumatic stress reaction to the loss of one's home and community. The American city is a landscape of stark contrasts, a physical testament to a history of both aspiration and oppression. But the future of our cities is not predetermined. Just as inequality was designed into the urban fabric, it can be redesigned out. A new generation of planners and activists is working to build more just cities. This includes reforming exclusionary zoning laws, like those that only permit single-family homes, and promoting community-led development like community land trusts, which create permanently affordable housing. A vital conversation is also emerging around reparative planning, a framework that acknowledges historical harms and seeks to actively redress them. The racial inequality etched into our neighborhoods is not a natural phenomenon. It is the result of a series of deliberate choices. Acknowledging that our cities were segregated by design is the first, essential step. Committing to a future of inclusion by design is the moral imperative that follows. It is the only path toward building cities that are truly for everyone.